one dinner invitation, one shallow grave, and a woman so calculating that Charles Dickens himself could not look away. They sat across from the man they planned to murder, smiled, poured his wine, and waited for him to finish washing his hands. By the time this investigation is done, you'll know exactly how a maid from Lausanne plotted the most cold-blooded murder in Victorian London, and why the woman who wore black satin to her own hanging became the most talked-about criminal in England since Jack Sheppard. Bermondsey, South London, August 1849. A place of tanneries and gin shops, of narrow streets that reeked of hide and river mud. The respectable folk of Miniver Place kept their curtains neat and their business to themselves. Behind one set of those curtains, the kitchen flagstones had been freshly lifted, the soil beneath freshly turned, and a dinner guest was already on his way. But here's what's never sat right with me. What the broadsheets of 1849 printed in breathless columns but conveniently failed to ask: was Maria Manning the cold architect of this murder? Or was she a woman who had been lied to, used and driven to the only desperate calculation left to her? And did Frederick Manning, the man who confessed to finishing the job himself, play the courts like a rum card sharp, letting his wife take the heavier blame? By the time this investigation closes, you'll understand not just who killed Patrick O'Connor in that Bermondsey kitchen, but why this case made Charles Dickens weep, why 30,000 people paid to watch the hanging, and why the establishment needed a foreign woman to carry the weight of this particular sin. This is the Bermondsey Horror, and it is far more twisted than any broadside ever told you. Maria de Roux arrived in England from Lausanne, Switzerland, sometime in the early 1840s. She was sharp, presentable, and possessed of that particular ambition that comes from knowing exactly what comfort feels like and knowing you cannot afford it. She found work as a lady's maid, first to Lady Polk of Haldon House in Devon, then, and this matters, to Lady Blantyre at Stafford House, London. One of the finest addresses in the city, Maria de Roux moved through rooms that most people in England never saw the inside of. It was in those circles that she met Patrick O'Connor. Patrick O'Connor, aged 50 years, gauger in His Majesty's Customs at the London docks, and moneylender of considerable means. A man of charm and some notoriety. It was said of him that he could extract profit from a stone and warmth from a woman in equal measure. O'Connor was 50, Irish, and already wealthy, money from customs work, from lending at extortionate rates, and from dealings that sat on the profitable side of murky. He was taken with the plump, vivacious Swiss maid. The attraction, by all accounts, was mutual. But Maria made a calculation. O'Connor was old. He drank, and there was another man, a younger man, a railway guard named Frederick Manning, who claimed he stood to inherit a fortune. In May 1847, Maria de Roux became Maria Manning, and the fortune, it turned out, was a lie. What followed the wedding was, by the standards of Victorian respectability, a right queer business indeed. Frederick Manning had no inheritance coming. His railway employer had sacked him on suspicion of involvement in a robbery, though no charge was ever made to stick. The fashionable address on Miniver Place cost money the Mannings did not have, and Maria, who had grown up watching wealthy households from the servants' side of the door, was not prepared to slide back into penury. So she maintained her friendship with Patrick O'Connor, more than friendship most likely. The Irishman visited Miniver Place for dinner with uncomfortable regularity, and Frederick, extraordinary as it sounds, appeared to tolerate it. He who kept his own counsel and asked no questions, or so it seemed. I seen that Irish gentleman at the Manning house more times than I could count, always of an evening, well-dressed, carrying something under his arm, a bottle of something, once a package. Mrs. Manning always answered the door herself. She'd give a little smile and close it quick behind him. Queer business, I thought, but it weren't my place to say. By the summer of 1849, O'Connor had done something that would seal his fate. He had quietly begun altering his will, moving substantial railway share certificates worth a considerable fortune in Maria's direction. Maria Manning knew this. She had encouraged it. She had made herself indispensable to a lonely, drinking, aging man who believed she still cared for him. The question, the one that haunts this whole case, is precisely when the murder was decided. The quicklime was delivered to Miniver Place in late July. The grave under the kitchen floor was dug before O'Connor was even invited to the fatal dinner. Someone made this decision in cold blood weeks in advance. The first dinner invitation, the 8th of August, 1849, came to nothing. O'Connor arrived at Miniver Place that evening with a companion, a man named Pierce Walsh. The Mannings smiled, served, and waited. When Walsh finally left, it was too late to proceed. The plan was scrapped for that night. Maria invited O'Connor back the following evening, the 9th of August, alone this time. She suggested, and the newspaper accounts are delicate here, that they might have some more intimate time together. O'Connor, who had no reason to suspect anything other than his own good fortune, gladly agreed. The Bermondsey tragedy, appalling discovery in a private dwelling. The body of a man, believed to be one Patrick O'Connor, a gauger of the London docks, was this day removed from beneath the flagstone floor of a dwelling in Miniver Place, Bermondsey. The corpse bore evidence of extreme violence. The premises have been abandoned. The occupants are sought. On the evening of the 9th, Patrick O'Connor arrived at number 3 Miniver Place. He walked through the front door into a house where the kitchen floor had already been prepared for his burial. What happened next took no more than a few minutes. As O'Connor moved toward the kitchen, perhaps to wash his hands before supper, as was the custom, Maria Manning raised a pistol she had purchased weeks earlier and fired it point blank into the back of his head. The shot did not kill him. Blimey, the man did not even fall. So Frederick Manning, the hapless wretch who had borrowed against a fortune that never existed, stepped forward. He had a ripping chisel in his hands. He brought it down on O'Connor's skull again and again until the kitchen was silent. They buried the body in the pre-dug grave, covered it with quicklime, and replaced the flagstones. Maria Manning changed out of her bloody dress. The following morning, she took a cab to O'Connor's lodgings in Mile End and systematically emptied them of everything of value: share certificates, cash, any instrument she could convert to money. She returned the next day to check if she'd missed anything. She had not. For 8 days, nothing. The Mannings kept up appearances. The house on Miniver Place looked precisely as it always had. Then 2 of O'Connor's colleagues from the docks came calling. They knew their friend had been at the Manning house on the 9th. They had not seen him since. Was he perhaps still visiting? Mrs. Manning denied all knowledge. She had not seen him, she said. He had not dined there. The lie was so brazen it bordered on theatrical, but it was enough to throw the Mannings into a panic they couldn't contain. Maria ordered Frederick to sell the furniture, every stick of it, for what he could get. Then, while he was out conducting that errand, she double-crossed him entirely. She packed 3 trunks, hailed a cab to King's Cross, and caught the train to Edinburgh. When Frederick returned to find an empty house and an absent wife, he did not wait to reason things through. He grabbed what he could, made for Waterloo Station, and caught the boat train to Jersey. 2 people, 2 directions, neither of them with a plan worth a farthing. And when you entered the premises at Miniver Place, Constable, what was the first thing to draw your attention? It was the flagstones, sir. Round 2 of them. The mortar were damp. The earth around was soft. I said to my colleague, "This wants looking at." And beneath those stones, the body of a man, sir, in a state of considerable decomposition. The quicklime had not answered as they'd hoped. Detectives, working at the new electric telegraph's remarkable speed, flashed the alarm to Edinburgh before Maria's train had even arrived. Scottish officers had already received a tip-off from a firm of brokers. A foreign woman with a foreign accent had attempted to sell railway shares that matched a published list of stolen certificates. She was in custody before she could convert a single one. Frederick fared no better. In St. Helier, Jersey, a railway guard from London with a fat purse and no visible business was drawing attention to himself in the most self-destructive fashion available to a Victorian man on the run. He was drinking extraordinary quantities of brandy every day, openly, in public. Detective Edward Langley arrived from London and found him in his bed, barely sober. When asked what had happened to Patrick O'Connor, Frederick Manning made the statement that would define his legacy. "I never liked him, so I battered his head with a ripping chisel." Core, not an ounce of remorse, not a syllable of strategy, just the bare, ugly fact of it. But here's what nobody stopped to properly ask. Frederick Manning's dramatic confession landed in the newspapers like a thunderclap. It was exactly the kind of line that sold broadsides. It confirmed the public's hunger for a villain they could understand. But examine it carefully, and the confession begins to look less like remorse, and rather more like calculation. He said he battered O'Connor. He did not say who fired the first shot. He did not say who purchased the pistol. He did not say who ordered the quicklime, dug the grave, or invited O'Connor to come alone on the night of the 9th. All the evidence pointed to Maria as the architect. Maria bought the weapon. Maria invited O'Connor. Maria dug into his lodgings the very next morning with the efficiency of someone who had already planned every step. But Frederick's confession, by admitting to the chisel, accomplished something quietly remarkable at the Old Bailey. It gave his defense a narrative, a jealous husband, driven to fury by his wife's lover, passion, provocation, a man losing his head. Maria, meanwhile, could offer no such sympathetic framing. She had purchased the pistol in cold blood. She had prepared the grave weeks in advance. There was no passion in it, only profit. "Your Majesty, I write in desperation from a place of darkness. I am told I shall hang, that there is no appeal to be made, that justice has run its course. But I submit with all humility that the verdict does not reflect the whole truth of what passed in that house. I am a foreigner. I am a woman without advocate. I have been made to bear more than my portion of what was done." Maria Manning, in her condemned cell, attempted to strangle herself with her own hands. It took 3 female warders to restrain her. She also wrote to Frederick, urging him, demanding, really, that he take the sole blame for O'Connor's death. He refused. He confirmed only what his confession had already stated, that Maria fired first, and he finished the matter with the chisel. So here's the open question, finally answered, and it is not a comfortable answer. Maria Manning was almost certainly the prime mover, the planner, the woman who chose in cold blood to profit from a man who loved her, with Frederick Manning, who had every reason to deflect, who made his confession strategically, and who let his wife shoulder the narrative weight of mastermind, was no innocent either. They were, in the end, 2 people who each saw the other as the instrument of their own survival. Right up to the gallows. The trial at the Old Bailey lasted 2 days. The jury took 45 minutes. Both Mannings were found guilty and sentenced to death. Maria screamed at the jury, called them animals, called England a perfidious nation. As she was led from the dock, she raged at Chief Justice Cresswell in terms that the newspapers printed only in modified form. In the weeks between verdict and execution, 2.5 million broadsides were sold in London streets, more than 30 times the weekly circulation of the Illustrated London News. The Mannings were not merely a crime story, they were a phenomenon. On the morning of the 13th of November, an estimated 30,000 people gathered around Horsemonger Lane Joel. They had paid for seats on rooftops and scaffolding. They smoked clay pipes and drank beer. Pickpockets worked the crowd with professional efficiency. Frederick Manning appeared first, his legs failing him on the stairs to the rooftop gallows. He had to be helped to the scaffold. Maria Manning came second, immaculately dressed in black satin, her face covered by a black veil at her own request. Even in this, she maintained control of the image. When the executioner William Calcraft withdrew the bolt, Frederick died almost without a struggle. Maria writhed for several seconds before going still. They were left to hang for the customary hour. Then they were cut down and buried in the Gale grounds in quicklime, the same preservative they had used on their victim. Among the 30,000 watching from a hired window nearby was one Charles Dickens. He wept, not for the Mannings. He wept for what the crowd revealed about the city he lived in. I believe that a sight so inconceivably awful as the wickedness and levity of the immense crowd collected at that execution this morning could be imagined by no man and could be presented in no heathen land under the sun. Dickens was haunted by the Mannings. He used Maria as the template from Mademoiselle Hortense in Bleak House, the murderous foreign maid lurking at the edges of a great house, cold-eyed and calculating beneath a surface of perfect servility. But that framing, the dangerous foreigner, the scheming woman from abroad, was also, perhaps, doing some work for Victorian England that it needed done. Maria Manning was Swiss, Frederick Manning was from Somerset, yet it was Maria who became the emblem of this crime. Thank God she wasn't an Englishwoman, one spectator wrote to the Times, as if nationality could absolve a country of the system that produced her. Maria de Roux had spent her adult life in service to some of the wealthiest houses in England. She had seen how money moved. She had understood, from the servant's side of the door, exactly what a comfortable life required, and exactly how far out of reach it was for a woman of her position. She made a monstrous choice. There is no softening that. Patrick O'Connor was 50 years old and trusted the woman who killed him. He deserved none of what happened in that Bermondsey kitchen. But the Bermondsey Horror was not simply the story of a wicked woman and her spineless husband. It was the story of a society that dangled wealth in front of those who served it, and then expressed profound shock when someone reached out and took it by force. The 30,000 who came to watch the hanging were not there for justice. They were there for entertainment, the comfortable thrill of watching someone else pay the price for wanting what they themselves were never permitted to want openly. If this case has stirred something in you, if you believe forgotten crimes deserve to be remembered, subscribe to Victorian Dark Mysteries. A new investigation drops every week, and if you've made it this far, you already know this channel is different. The grave markers from Horsemonger Lane Jail were rescued when the prison was demolished in 1881. They sit today in the collection of the Southwark Heritage Centre. A death mask of Maria Manning exists in Dumfries, and in the pages of Bleak House, published just 3 years after her execution, she walks again, cold, precise, and dressed impeccably through every chapter. Some people are too dangerous to forget. Some stories are too ugly to look away from. That's why we're here.